Hi everyone, and welcome to the last installment of our As For Me and My House discussion. A lot of this very slim but very powerful book has already been discussed by Jason, Emily, and Nicola. They have amazing videos that I will link down below. Please make sure that you watch those. I don't think you have to watch them before this one, but they'll probably provide a lot of context that I'm going to skip over. One of the things that we're trying to focus on this year with the Hello Hemlock Book Club is getting some active discussion going on the Goodreads forum. I'll link our Goodreads page below. Feel free to sign up for Goodreads if you haven't already and join the book club that way. One of the things that we touched on in the forum in January was the idea of Mrs. Bentley, the narrator and protagonist, as weak or passive. This is something that I wanted to explore fairly briefly for this last video. We're reading this book in 2015 and it was published in 1941. I think this idea of looking at Mrs. Bentley as weak or passive is kind of a judgment call that trickles down from how we view women and feminism and what it means to be a strong female today in 2015. There's also some tension around the fact that it was a male writer using a woman for his narration. I immediately wanted to compare how Mrs. Bentley was cast as the narrator to be fairly passive with Nick Carraway from The Great Gatsby. Nick Carraway, while male, is also quite passive, and I think there's a reason for that because both of these characters are narrating and guiding the reader through the lives of everyone else in the story. When you think of The Great Gatsby, you think of Gatsby and Daisy and all these other people. You don't immediately think of Nick Carraway, and yet nobody looks at Nick Carraway and says, what a passive fool. How dare F. Scott write him so passively? And I think it's important to note that when we see a man being written passively for the purpose of narration, we think, wow, F. Scott's so amazing. Fitzgerald, what a classic guy. And yet when it's Mrs. Bentley, we kind of write her off, even though she's this fully fleshed character. She's had this whole life that she gives to us in bits and pieces, little parcels here and there throughout the book. She was being educated in music and she was considering a career, and she made certain sacrifices in order to maintain a relationship with her husband. One of our book club members, Carolina, had mentioned in the forums that she didn't like how she was being portrayed, and I asked the question, did you think that it was because she was a product of her time? And the more I thought about my own question, because I'm a narcissist, the more I realized that that's actually a really damaging way to look at women in fiction and women in history. What I've been doing a lot of my own accord is following organizations like A Mighty Girl and Amy Poehler's Smart Girls, and I've been following these organizations because they're publishing female history that I've never been exposed to before. Just because history textbooks that I was given in classrooms contained more information about men than women does not mean that women didn't live during a certain time period or they were totally oppressed during another time period. It just means that whoever decided to write the history books didn't think that women were important enough to mention. This is something that I wrote down and I'm just going to read it because that's easier for me. There's a tendency for erasure in women's history. She is a fictional character, but she is a full and flawed one. She recognizes in some way that she may have made an error in abandoning her piano. If this character were a man, we would be sympathizing with him and applauding the author for such a realistic depiction of human error. But because she's a woman, we look at Ross and we wonder if he's a chauvinist, or if at the time in which Mrs. Bentley would have lived meant that that's how she would have acted, and we shrug it off as if she was a product of her time. Throughout history, women have been doing a lot of things and it hasn't been talked about, it hasn't been written about, and I think that's very important that we recognize that. And I'm really glad that I've read this book and have been able to have these discussions, even in small ways, with people so that I can kind of understand, you know, it does matter that Sinclair Ross chose his narrator to be a woman, and it does matter that the narrator can be seen as kind of passive, and it does matter that there's more to her than her relationship with her husband. The fact that she is so flawed is one of the things that in 2015 we are complaining about in like women in film and women in literature and what it means to be a strong female character. It doesn't mean you have to be like jacked to the nines and carry a gun And it doesn't mean that you have to be likable. It means that you have to have more dimensions than who your relationship is with a man. So I don't know if this book would pass the Bechdel test, but it passed my test of just being a bitchin' author. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to pick up Shani Mutu's Moving Forward Sideways Like a Crab. That is going to be the Hello Hemlock read for the month of March, and we're going to be discussing it in April, so you've still got some time. Please try and pick it up if you can. Bye.